What I'm interested in is like, how can we build the strongest network effects? And I think that this model of being completely not only free, which is very hard to undercut, but actually free plus incentives plus token rewards and being the best, that is the best way that we can build strong network effects where every user who hears that they can do this stuff on Shapeshift, like that will bring more users in. As we get more users, we have more negotiating power, more leverage to go to any protocol or service and say, hey, if you want Shapeshift users, you have to give us a cut of the revenue that you're generating from these users, which brings in more partners, which then can help bring in more users because we're the best way to use more stuff. And I think it's just a really strong network effect that regardless of us being completely open source, would be very hard to replicate. It creates a very strong competitive barrier.
The attention economy pits you against me. Money makes no sense these days, and the robots are taking jobs. The planet is in peril, but we can set us free. Put our brains together if we lead with our hearts. Gotta take back control from the greedy and the corporate. Gotta take back control to the hands of the people. Collaborate and listen. We learn and we grow. Build the future that we want.
Welcome back to Tech Back Control. Today, I'm very excited to bring you an interview with Willy Ogorzaly from ShapeShift DAO. We recorded this on May 17th, 2023, and we discussed a lot of topics. Firstly, we covered what it means to decentralize a company and form a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. We covered the benefits and challenges when embracing decentralization and fully open source software, and Willy explains what it's like working in a DAO and why you might want to join it. We also discussed the future of the internet and what it will take to bring this open, decentralized, and essentially community-centric model into the mainstream consciousness. In that, he explains how you actually build a profitable organization that's based on zero fees, but surviving on the open internet Web3 protocols. It's really fascinating. And finally, Willy talks about his experience and passion to bring public goods to the world through these decentralized mechanisms. Honestly, it's one of the most interesting conversations I've had, and you're going to enjoy this next hour. So let's jump in. Cool. So, Willy, nice to meet you. Thanks for joining this.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's really good. Thanks for taking the time as well. So, to start off, do you think you could give us a bit of a background about yourself and maybe about ShapeShift? Imagine it's like an elevator pitch, and for some of the newbies who are listening in, everything they need to know about your role and about ShapeShift.
Sounds great. So currently my role is head of decentralization for the Fox Foundation. Fox Foundation is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to supporting the ShapeShift DAO and achieving full decentralization. So kind of a fun title, fun mission, very unique. Never had a job quite like this before, but I love it. Before joining the foundation, I was principal product manager at ShapeShift back in the centralized days. I started there in 2018 when ShapeShift acquired my second startup, Bitfract, which was built on top of ShapeShift. Before that, I started my first company as a college student at University of Colorado Boulder in 2013. Ended up dropping out to focus on that and basically built that for 5 years. It was a SaaS-enabled legal tech marketplace. I knew very little about startups or even tech when I first started that company, but it was a great learning experience. And we actually started Bitfract the same month that we sold that first startup.
Oh, wow. And so what does ShapeShift do?
So ShapeShift has shape-shifted a bit over the years. It started in 2014 initially as the first way to trade crypto from your own wallet. So it was a centralized exchange. This is before DEXs or even before Ethereum. But it enabled users to maintain self-custody, except for the split second where they swapped with ShapeShift. So it was pretty innovative. It was very popular and was the most popular way to trade crypto from your own wallet for many years. And then in 2018, ShapeShift came to the conclusion that it needed to start requiring KYC in order to continue operating. And that kind of crushed the trade business. So around the same time, we were working on the new version of ShapeShift, which was a platform, kind of an all-in-one platform for self-custody. You could buy, sell, trade, see your whole portfolio. And initially it supported KeepKey hardware wallet, which was a hardware wallet owned by ShapeShift, but later expanded to support other wallets. And we were still trying to make the exchange work until 2021, January, when we basically had witnessed the proliferation of DEXs. And shout out to Uniswap for basically igniting this movement. And basically when we saw what Uniswap was doing, we're like, oh my gosh, they've kind of achieved the original ShapeShift vision even better than we could ever imagine doing it as a centralized organization. And we thought it was awesome. So we basically finally admitted that we had kind of lost the trading game, and we embraced the innovation. And we integrated 0x in January to aggregate all the Ethereum dexes. Then we integrated Thorchain in April, the day that Thorchain launched mainnet. Thorchain is a protocol that enables cross-chain trading. So that same day that we integrated Thorchain, we sunset ShapeShift's trading engine. We stopped KYCing users. And then a couple months later, we launched the DAO. And what the DAO is focused on right now is building the ultimate interface to the decentralized universe. It's live right now on app.shapeshift.com or in the iOS and Android app stores. And it's a open source community-owned interface that supports 170 different wallets. It also still supports KeepKey. It's the primary interface for KeepKey, and also the ShapeShift native wallet, which is a software wallet you can use on web or mobile that supports 12 different chains, plus a bunch of other wallets you can come connect. It supports 12 different chains, not just Ethereum or EVMs, but Bitcoin, Doge, Cosmos, Thorchain, a growing number of chains. And then we aggregate fiat ramps, dexes, and DeFi protocols. So again, it's still kind of the same vision of the all-in-one self-custody platform. And kind of one way you can think about it is like an aggregator of even aggregators, basically. So we're always trying to help users find the best opportunities, the best liquidity, the best rates. And in order to do that, we aggregate, and we really stand on top of the shoulders of all these amazing protocols across chains and really just try to aggregate that into a really nice, easy to use interface.
I love that phrase. You say the ultimate user interface to the decentralized universe. Is that right?
Yes, and it's not necessarily the official. I don't know if that's the DAO's official mission, but that's how I like to think about it. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. So I'm really curious. ShapeShift. I mean, I used ShapeShift back in 2016, 2017 when it was the company. I don't know how many companies have undergone this decentralization effort, if any, other than ShapeShift. From your perspective, because you were there before and you're still there now, kind of leading it, how different is the DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization, from ShapeShift, the company?
Totally. Great question. There's certainly a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. I think what stayed the same is a lot of the vision, the mission, the values of ShapeShift. When ShapeShift launched the DAO, it kind of it basically handed over kind of draft vision, mission, values to the community and said, going forward, these are up to you. The community can change this. And there has not been a lot of push to change kind of those core fundamentals of ShapeShift. What's different, a lot is different. So, of course, we no longer have a CEO, and we were fortunate to have a really incredible CEO at ShapeShift. Eric Voorhees was awesome. Best CEO and the only CEO I ever really worked for, besides myself. But and now obviously we have the community instead of Eric. And Eric has been demoted from a CEO just to a regular community member. Obviously, he's got a decent amount of Fox though. So that's a big difference, and a lot, of course, unfolds from that. Some other major differences, one that I really appreciate is just how transparent the DAO is. So ShapeShift, it always had the value of transparency, but at the same time, it was pretty secretive. Like we couldn't talk about what we were building until it was live. That was something that Eric felt pretty strongly about. He didn't like all of the hype and stuff. So I always didn't like that because it'd be at conferences and I'd want to talk about the really cool stuff we were building, and we weren't allowed to. So now everything's out in the open. I love that. And really like the silos, the walls between the team, the core kind of contributors, and the community of users have just been completely dissolved. So before, like all the conversation and stuff would happen in Slack, and the users, the community couldn't see that. Now it's just Discord, and anyone can come jump in, see the conversations, and even contribute and participate. And because of that, we have the community is just, I think, one of the biggest superpowers that the DAO has. Obviously, before, as a private organization, like all of the output of ShapeShift was pretty much limited to the resources and the bandwidth of the internal team. But now we have the whole power of the community unlocked, basically, and anyone can come in and contribute and add value, and everything's open source. That's another big difference. Is before ShapeShift had a couple open source things, but was mostly closed. Yeah, it was mostly closed source.
Oh, was it?
Now everything is open source. Yeah. So those are some of the differences. I'm sure we could list some more, but I think those are the first that come to mind.
That's interesting. I'm really curious. So you decentralize the governance. So the Fox tokens are airdropped to people to give them a governance voting power, I guess, any users. And then you mentioned the layer on top of a lot of decentralized protocols. So you're kind of leveraging that decentralization. But like the web app, the infrastructure, how does that work in a decentralized way? Or is there some level of necessary centralization that just has to happen still?
So yeah, we are pushing for complete full decentralization. We're not quite there yet, but we've already made some pretty great progress since the DAO launched. So the legacy version of ShapeShift was very centralized. Ultimately, all these transactions settled on the blockchain. But between that, between users and these decentralized protocols or centralized services, whatever it was, ShapeShift operated a server and a database with all the user accounts. And yeah, you couldn't access ShapeShift unless you came through our basically gate. Now, the new app is primarily an interface. And so it's like an interface between users, their keys, and these decentralized protocols or third-party APIs that the user talks to directly. No longer are we routing these requests through our server. So the interface itself is available on IPFS. That part was, once we had ripped out the back end of ShapeShift, which took quite a long time, the DAO spent the first 16 months of its existence basically rebuilding the legacy centralized version of ShapeShift with all the same features, but without that back end. So basically an interface and a lot of that business logic and stuff just happening client side. And the only backend right now that ShapeShift powers is the node infrastructure. So we still are running nodes for each of the chains that ShapeShift supports. Other than that, anytime you see price data or you get a quote from a DEX or a fiat on an off ramp, that's all client-side API calls. So the user is just talking directly to these third parties. And the blockchain infrastructure that's the next boss, basically. We've been working for over a year now with Coinbase Cloud and with the lead developer of Thorchain, Chad Barraford, on a new Cosmos L1 app chain that is like a decentralized Infura for all the chains that we support. So basically incentivizes a network of validators to operate this node infrastructure and provide blockchain data both to the ShapeShift interface, but also to any interface that wants to be fully decentralized. So the launch for that it was initially estimated a year ago for Q2 of this year. I think they're still pushing for that, but it's possible that might happen in Q3, but it's coming. And at that point, there'll probably be a transition period. We'll have a beta version of ShapeShift powered by Archeo that you can test out. And once we feel confident with that, we will basically, instead of right now the foundation operates one instance of all this node infrastructure. Instead, the foundation will just become one of many validators on Archeo that ShapeShift users can connect to. So at that point, the ShapeShift application will be completely decentralized. The front end will be on IPFS. The back end will be powered by Archeo, and again, the back end is just this node data. There will be some third-party APIs, but that aren't core to the operation of it. Even without those, you'd still be able to see all your transaction history, see your balances, and interact directly with these decentralized protocols. And nobody could stop it, basically. Nobody could censor it. It'll be completely unstoppable.
And you're building Archeo at the moment. Is that because that doesn't exist in the market? There isn't a decentralized Infura or node infrastructure for that right now. So you're building it.
Correct. Part of the first phase of Archeo was just research to determine we knew we needed this, and we tried to see if there was anything out there that could solve that problem. Pocket Network is probably the closest, and I totally respect what they're doing, but it's not fully decentralized yet. And they're already doing censoring geo restriction and stuff. So yeah, I hope that they solve it. Archeo is a very different approach, and will also support all the different chains that ShapeShift already supports.
Right. And you mentioned that when ShapeShift was the company, it was closed source. Now everything is open source. Is that an important part of the principles of the DAO, or is that under the current community leadership? How does that? What led to that?
Yeah, I think it was a decision that was made when we decided to go full decentralization. And I think, decentralization and open source kind of go hand in hand, and just in that spirit of being completely transparent. I wonder if you could, I haven't really thought too much about it, but it's an interesting question. Could you have a DAO that's code is closed source? In theory, I think you could figure out a way to do it, right? So much is possible with DAOs, and it's really up to the community to decide how you design it and how you gate different information. So I think it is possible. But what we've done is we've kind of just taken the approach of full transparency, full openness. And personally, I think that's really awesome. I love open source software. And I think open source software as a public good is just one of the best things that we can do for society, for humanity. My favorite type of software is open source public good software.
Cool. No, that's good to hear. I'm also a very big fan of that, and that is one of the things that I kind of appreciate about that commitment, because I think it is quite hard to do. But I'm curious with the DAO, there's no board, there's no CEO. So Eric Voorhees stepped down. He's just a community member. He doesn't have like I guess he has like a certain influence, but he doesn't have a special rights within the community. Is that right?
Correct. He has no special permissions or rights. Obviously, he's got more Fox than the average holder.
Understandably. But then does the DAO have, I guess, employees? Does it have a board? Like, how does it work? I'm curious.
Yeah, we have a really great diagram that illustrates this on shapeshift.com/careers. But basically, what the diagram shows is that on top, we have the community. And beneath that, we have a concept called work streams, which are basically sub-DAOs that have their own treasury, and the community ultimately approves these work streams and approves their budgets. And once they've approved a work stream and a budget, which anybody can propose a new work stream to the community, that work stream also has a leader that gets elected as part of creating a new work stream. And that leader, basically, it's their responsibility to allocate the budget however they best see fit to achieve the goals and the KPIs that they've kind of committed to the community in their proposal. As long as the work stream is doing a good job, everybody's happy. If the community feels like the work stream is not performing, or let's say that they're not hitting their goals and they're not communicating sufficiently to the community to satisfy them, then the community does have the ability to basically revoke the remaining budget from that work stream.
Wow.
Which has happened in the past, and we've had work streams, like competing work streams basically, that are trying to solve the same problem. And one work stream, like taking over a work stream, support was a work stream, and then it kind of got folded into operations when operations proposed, like, we think we can do a better job at a lower cost for this. So yeah, really anything's on the table. Even that organizational structure can be evolved by the community. But yeah, this is what we have in place right now. And because of that, we can basically have, full-time salaried contributors that contribute to a work stream, or you can have bounty hunters, or a work stream could decide to hire a centralized agency or another DAO if that's what they wanted to do. It really gives that flexibility to the work stream to decide how best to achieve the goals that they've committed.
So if I or anyone listening was really interested in working for a DAO, or even working for ShapeShift DAO, what advice would you give them when it comes to the good sides of this and why you should get involved, and also maybe trade-offs against traditional employment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, every DAO is so unique. I like to call them snowflakes, but maybe they're even more unique than snowflake. Like, no two DAOs are alike. And so what I love about DAOs is that it really enables you to find kind of a community or a mission that you really believe in. There's so many different DAOs out there. You can find a community or mission that you believe in. You can just jump right into the Discord. Depending on the DAO, sometimes they're like token gated. But many DAOs, you can just jump right in and get involved. And yeah, that's one of the things I love about it, is that there can be these DAOs where people all around the world just basically jump in. They're aligned with the same mission and vision, and they can build cool shit together. And you don't need a centralized organization to do that. Many DAOs like ShapeShift, like Giveth, have proven that. I will say that DAOs aren't for some people. Some people probably won't like it. And I think the people that typically might be overwhelmed by a DAO or might prefer working at a centralized organization are people who really like structure and routine. I think DAOs are a lot more loose, and that can be challenging for some people for sure, that I know are just great contributors. They like crypto, but they're just not interested in working for a DAO because they want more rigid structure. But yeah, I really think that one of my goals when we decentralized at ShapeShift was to try and get as many former centralized ShapeShift employees to at least just give the DAO a try. And what I said, I was like, if you like working for ShapeShift, you're going to love working for the DAO. And I think for many people who gave it a try, that was true. They appreciate having a little bit more independence and authority, basically. Yes, we still have the community as the boss, but the engineering work stream, obviously, for example, is the community has elected them and kind of delegated some authority to them, and they are the subject matter experts when it comes to engineering-related questions. So the engineering work stream and the DAO is a lot more empowered and has a lot more influence and authority than they did back at a centralized organization, when it was, the CEO ultimately held so much power. And if the CEO said, look, this feature needs to be shipped by this date, make it happen, the engineering work stream didn't necessarily feel empowered to like really push back against that, right? Push back against the person who was paying them. Yeah, in the DAO, they absolutely do have a lot more influence, and I think that they appreciate that relative to working at centralized work.
It's interesting. Did a lot of ShapeShift employees move over and remain at the DAO, or is the composition of I guess I don't know what the term is. It's not employees, people working in work streams, I guess.
Yeah.
Is the composition like different? Like, has that changed?
Yeah, there's definitely still some Genesis Foxes, and even if they're not, actively contributing or full-time contributors, many of them are still involved in the community and will come pop in here and there, checking on progress or to give feedback. I think we did probably pass. I would need to go look at the org chart, but I think at this point we are majority new contributors that were not former centralized Foxes, which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that is. And how do you build culture in a decentralized organization, like and relationships and things? I assume you don't have an office or a place you go to each day. So how does that work?
Yeah, I think similarly to how you would build it in a centralized organization, like so many of these things are the same. And I think one big difference, of course, is that in a centralized organization, a lot of that culture comes from top down from the CEO. But at the same time, the employees and the contributors still obviously play a role in that. In the DAO, of course, it's very much driven by the community. ShapeShift was unique in the sense that it didn't just start as a brand new DAO from scratch, but it already had somewhat of a community. It already had so much history and values that really Eric, I think, had imbued in the culture at centralized ShapeShift. So a lot of that did carry forward to the DAO. And I'd say, yeah, it's evolved going forward just based on the active community members, basically, and the different kind of culture and flair that they bring to the table. We don't have an office, but the Discord's popping, and we have like public meetings pretty much every day except for Friday. That's no meeting day at the DAO. So anyone's welcome to come check it out and again contribute to that culture, like help us shape the culture. We did have our first DAO Wow in December of last year, where we brought together, I think it was 25 Foxes from all around the world to get together in person for a week of brainstorming and bonding. And so that was awesome. And I think we're going to try and do that at least once a year.
You're probably on the forefront of knowledge in this space when it comes to taking a company and decentralizing it. I don't know if that's a common career path that people have gone through. But are there any lessons that you think also apply to centralized corporations that can be adopted? And maybe I'm not trying to decentralize all organizations. I mean, that might be wonderful, but are there elements of it that maybe could be brought into centralized companies and make them just better places to work?
I love that question. And it reminds me of before ShapeShift even knew that it could become a DAO. I remember we were having conversations around one of my missions or kind of goals as product manager was to maximize Fox utility. We had Fox token out there, and how can we maximize the utility of the Fox token? And this is before we had decided that we're going to go full DAO. And but meanwhile, we're seeing DeFi Summer. We're seeing some of the most successful projects in the space structured as DAOs. So we didn't yet know that it was possible to become a DAO. But I was like, how can we make Fox at least more close to a governance token, right? Like even if ShapeShift is still a centralized organization and ultimately the board and the shareholders control everything, what if we could still give Fox token holders the ability to vote and signal their preference for different things? And so I think that's something that centralized organizations can still do, is involve their community, involve their users. I think even just the move from like going from a Slack that's just closed off to just a Discord, or like, and you make some channels public and like people who are interested can come in and see the conversations or contribute, share ideas, I think is awesome. And I think that the community, the users appreciate that. And it's valuable for the corporation as well to just be able to not only get that feedback and have a direct line of communication with their users, but potentially leverage the community and reward them for doing things that contribute and add value to the corporation. You don't need to be a DAO to do those things.
That's really interesting, because I noticed like the ShapeShift roadmap, and I think a lot of things are on like a public-facing Notion project, right? And I'm curious, like, I have Fox tokens. I'm technically part of the DAO, I guess. I voted in some things, but I'm not as active as a lot of other community members. But what tools like when I'm at work, I might use Microsoft Teams, I might use Slack, I might use a number of different like enterprise suite tools to stay in touch and collaborate with people. What do you use other than Discord to create that like digital tooling?
Yeah. Discord, like you said, is definitely where most of the action happens. We also have a forum. We originally used Discourse, but the community passed a proposal to migrate to a more Web3 native forum called Metaphoro. So that's where more of the long form discussion happens. Notion has been great. It's available it was something we used at centralized ShapeShift and carried forward into the DAO. And so it's available to every work stream to use it. And so that gets used a ton. GitHub as well is where a lot of the engineering conversations happen. We try to keep as much of the engineering related discussions in GitHub as we can for both tracking and for visibility. Those are the main ones, Google Docs, Google Hangouts, all that stuff, Google Sheets. We still use a lot of that for sure.
Cool.
And yeah, it's interesting. I think it's really, unlike a centralized organization, at a centralized organization, there might be a little bit more required tools that you kind of have to use and you don't really have a choice. So it's like, you're like, well, I'm going to go work at IBM. Like, I guess I got to use Microsoft stuff. But at the DAO, it's up to each contributor, obviously, and up to each work stream. And then kind of what we do is we say, like, here's some tools, like here's Notion. And if you are a work stream leader, you don't have to pay for your own Notion. You'll get that covered. You have access to it, but you don't have to use it if you don't want to.
Cool. No, that's really interesting. I want to ask you a few questions more about crypto and Web3, if that's okay. So I'm really curious. You've been in the space for quite some time, and I think you're on the conference circuits. You're building actively in it. What do you think are the biggest opportunities or threats, for that matter, for decentralized organizations like yours in this crypto Web3 space?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's opportunities across the space. So like DeFi is obviously a big piece, DAOs, NFTs, like account abstraction, wallets, you name it. Like there's opportunity in each of these different kind of sectors. So what I would do if I were someone looking to build something cool is I would figure out which of these sectors am I really passionate about. And anyone who's used any of these things knows that there's still a lot of opportunity for improvement. There's opportunity for things to actually be fully decentralized. Like that's still a big need that we have, and doing that in a way that still is a good user experience and solves important problems for users. And yeah, I'd say that there's problems in each of those that need to be solved.
What about the threats to? I mean, are there any existing threats, either regulatory or others, to the existence of a truly decentralized organization building in this space that you're aware of?
Yeah, I think it's funny that you asked that, because I think right now more of the threats are for more of the centralized organizations. And like if you're a custodian, right, it's very difficult. That's like a very scary place to be right now. And there's a lot of uncertainty. And you also have to, abide by a lot of regulations that create a lot of overhead. Like centralized ShapeShift, there's a whole compliance team. It spent a ton of money on legal fees just to comply with the regulations. And we basically got out of the regulated business of trading by integrating these decentralized protocols and no longer being a counterparty or a custodian to these trades. So I think it's pretty stressful right now to be like, even Coinbase, even one of the most by the books and most successful crypto companies in America. I think it's pretty scary right now. I think there's a lot of uncertainty because the regulators haven't passed clear regulations. And, in my opinion, a lot of these legacy regulations don't apply very well to the new decentralized organizations that we're building. I think there's still uncertainty if you're building completely decentralized stuff, and it's very hard to actually be completely decentralized. But what I love right now is that I'm grateful that we have the Constitution and that speech is protected. And as long as you're just publishing open source code and you're at least in the United States, I don't know what the rules are all around the world, but that is protected by the Constitution. And so it's something that I feel very confident and comfortable doing because of that. And so often what I say is like, if you really want to mitigate a lot of this risk, then, don't take custody of users' funds. Don't do these regulated activities, because then you have to abide by the regulations. But if you can figure out ways to avoid doing any of those regulated activities and make sure that all that you're doing is publishing open source code, then I think you're actually in a much safer position, not legal advice. Yeah.
No. It's really interesting actually, because I think you mentioned in a few answers to other questions the way that this crypto, blockchain, Web3, whatever the appropriate chosen term is for it, the way that it does shift certain power, especially like voting abilities and control abilities to users, and then the whole open source model, like you said, of free speech and just publishing things openly is a really interesting way of kind of being compliant from a regulatory perspective, because you're not like holding users' funds or anything. But I think it's interesting for me because a big theme in this whole project, this whole podcast, is trying to talk about shifting power back to people, but using technology to do so. So that's important to me. I'm curious where you see the future of ShapeShift, the DAO, the whole space, actually, the whole Web3 space along those themes, and whether there's, what the other benefits are to society in general. Sorry, very big question.
Totally. I'll do my best. I get really excited about this power of community-owned organizations. And the more that I think about it, the more I think that the organizations of the future that are going to win are going to be the organizations that give the community power and ownership, and that have the strongest community, who can build the strongest community, basically. So that's what I think about with ShapeShift. Like, what does the ultimate interface of the decentralized universe look like? I feel strongly from first principles that it will be community-owned. I don't think the ultimate interface of the decentralized universe is going to be privately owned or 40% owned by JP Morgan, for example. So, yeah, and I think that a big part of what I'm trying to do with ShapeShift is to give the community ownership, power, and create flywheels where if you're a user of ShapeShift, just by doing activity, you don't have to hold Fox, but if you do activity in the app that supports the DAO, benefits the DAO should reward you with Fox tokens. And really, I feel like, if you're contributing to any DAO and you're adding meaningful value, you should get rewarded for it, and you should get rewarded with ownership. And I think there's a powerful flywheel that we can unlock there of users coming into ShapeShift, becoming community members, and earning Fox, becoming community members, and being incentivized then to hopefully some of them become contributors, and then add more value to ShapeShift and bring in more users that then turn into more community members, more contributors. I think if we can unlock that flywheel, that's the best recipe to build the ultimate interface to the decentralized universe. And I think that same thing applies to a lot of different organizations and needs that we have in the space. So that's one of the things I get really excited about is just enabling the users, the community, to actually own it. Like, I get really excited thinking about a decentralized Uber where the drivers own the majority of it, right? And riders have a piece too. And 100% of the payment goes from the rider to the driver. And we're just cutting out these middlemen that we no longer need. And then I think the more that we can remove the need for trust, the need for these middlemen, I think that's going to really empower society and humanity. And at ShapeShift, a big part of what we're trying to do is just give people financial sovereignty. And that includes giving them access to currencies that aren't centrally controlled. And just that alone, I think fiat is the biggest scam in history, basically. And I think if we can just give people financial sovereignty, that will empower people more than any other one thing that we could build that I can imagine. And similarly, I think there's so many amazing projects in the Web3 space that similarly are trying to cut out the middleman, give users control, be completely trustless, completely transparent. And they're amazing. There's so many amazing things, and we can't solve all of that, right? But if we can build this interface that's fully decentralized, it's open source, it's multi-chain, it's community owned, it's free, then I think that's the best thing that we can do to then empower all these amazing other projects that are getting built.
That's really interesting. Do you see the future of ShapeShift being primarily decentralized finance based, or is this the user interface to an even bigger world in the vision? I don't know if that's already part of the roadmap, but from your perspective.
Yeah, I think that's why we say the decentralized universe instead of just the decentralized finance. Because there's more to it, and obviously DeFi is kind of where most of the action's happening right now. But we recently released support for NFTs as well. I'm sure that's going to be in a space that's going to evolve quite a bit. And again, right now, it's still a lot of it is speculation, but we're starting to see things like on-chain resumes or proof of attendance protocol and stuff like that. So yes, we want to give users access to all of that. And we can't do all that in the app. So I think kind of one way we think about it is like, okay, what are the most common popular use cases for crypto right now? So like buying and selling, sending, receiving, trading, earning yield. Okay, how can we create the best user experience that we can for that? And then aggregate all these amazing protocols that provide that service to users, so that users can access all of the core stuff directly from within the interface. But then we have this dApps section with like over 300 different dApps that you can connect to with Wallet Connect. So there's all these other things like games, NFTs, gambling casinos, you name it, tax services, like whatever, that are still useful and that some people might need, but they're not important enough, or not, I want to say important enough, but they're not common enough to, at least yet, to like build that experience natively, because then we end up cluttering kind of the native experience of the app and we make the core app less usable. So it's kind of like, just like on a phone or a computer, like there's some apps that everyone needs that are just come on the device itself. And then there's an app store or a browser where you can go access the long tail of everything.
That's really cool. I'm wondering, it's hard to imagine in 2023, in a true mainstreaming event, if that vision takes shape, what do you see ShapeShift replacing for the average user? Is it the interface to an equivalent of PayPal or their bank account or a loan or a mortgage or, I don't know, like tickets to a concert? Like, where's the, in a true mainstreaming event, what does that look like?
Ooh, such a cool question. Certainly banks, right? We got to replace the banks. If people are still using banks in 10 years and bank interfaces, then we will not have achieved our vision or our mission. But yeah, ticketing websites, that's another great example, right? Like, why should you necessarily need another app? I do get very excited about the potential just for what wallets can do. And yeah, just giving users ownership of as much as we can. Like, they should have complete control over their ticket. And if someone builds that protocol that enables that, then the hope is that that will be better than these centralized current offerings that where middlemen extract a ton of value basically and have still all the control at the end of the day. So I do think over time, these protocols that are just trustless, have no middleman, they're open source, hopefully they're public good. And if not, then, there's going to be an opportunity for someone to potentially fork them and make it a public good, right? Yeah, that's going to be the best for the consumers. And at the end of the day, the consumers, the people win. So yeah, it's pretty cool to think about, but I do envision not only, ShapeShift and other wallets being an interface to your finance, but also other digital data that it could either be on a centralized server or you can just hold it in your wallet or on chain and you hold access to it in your wallet that you control. So it's going to be a big UX challenge to make that look good. It kind of reminds me, like Elon's talking about making Twitter like the everything app. It kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah. I don't know how you can take Twitter to that level from where it is now, but hopefully ShapeShift has a better chance given the DAO approach. I'm really curious. You mentioned about like the problems with fiat currencies. Do you see a lot more adoption of ShapeShift from people in Argentina or Turkey or places that are really, we're struggling with inflation, but they are really struggling and have done for some time with just the absolute destruction of value from their like national enforced currency? Do you see that adoption, or is it still limited in like US and European pockets?
We're still, most of our users are still in the United States or Europe. I think it was like 30% though, or something, of our users are in other countries. Yeah, it's in the last Alphax, the globalization workstream will give an update on how that's growing. And it is, I think, trending. I think the US share is decreasing and we're seeing more global adoption. And a big part of that, I think, is just can be attributed to the globalization workstream. And it was something that we tried to do at centralized ShapeShift. We tried to do globalization and we're never really successful at it. But it's one of those things that in the DAO, I think works so much better because, again, like the globalization workstream, they translate the app into all these different languages. And it's community members who are already community members of ShapeShift, but they live in Turkey or Brazil or anywhere, Lithuania, like all over the world. And they come in and they're like, hey, I love ShapeShift. I want to get involved. Like, do you guys, I live here. Do you guys have a community here yet? And like, either yes, join them, or no. And then that person starts it. And then we'll, they're obviously, it'll typically start with a bilingual person who speaks English and their native language. And then they'll translate the app. We'll create a community in Discord, and then it just starts building. And yeah, that's one of the things, again, it's the perfect example of the power of DAOs and the power of community. And I certainly would like to see that. I would love to see ShapeShift get more global adoption outside of the United States and Europe.
No, that'd be really good to see. And again, at this phase in, what are we? We're May 2023. It's hard to imagine the next big crypto bull run right now. I think it's unclear whether that major adoption cycle kicks in anytime soon. But if it does kick in and we see sudden, I'm not thinking just purely price increases, but actual adoption from people, is ShapeShift and the infrastructure and the decentralized effort, is it ready for prime time if that was to happen beginning of 2024?
I think when the bull run comes, no one's going to really be ready for it. I think we always you're like, oh man, I can't wait for the bull market. And then it comes and you're like, wait, we just need a little bit more time to build. So yeah, we could definitely use a few more months. I don't think we're quite ready for it yet, but I think ShapeShift in the industry is more ready than it ever has been, for sure. I even think during the last bull market, L2s and stuff were very, very new. They certainly weren't integrated with fiat on and off ramps or with centralized exchanges yet. So it was still pretty hard you still had to kind of onboard onto L1 and then bridge over to L2, which doesn't really solve the problem. And we know we can't fit the masses on L1. We need to be able to onboard masses directly onto L2, let them access all the stuff there, and off ramp from L2 if they need to, without ever touching L1. So, I think we're a lot more ready. We could definitely use some more time, but we're getting there. And I think, I like to think that during this next bull market, we will be at the point where ShapeShift is fully decentralized, unstoppable, and hopefully profitable as well. Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about the profit side? So how does we haven't really mentioned it. How does it work? Do you take fees? Do you charge people? I know there's no subscription. What's happening in the DAO when that for you guys?
Yeah, it's a great question. And all of our finances are completely transparent. It's another thing I love about working in the DAO. So anyone's welcome to come check it out. We have a number of dashboards, we call them, with our revenue, our treasury, our expenses. ShapeShift does not charge any fees. It's up to the community to decide whether or not to charge fees. There was actually recently a proposal to enable fees on Thorchain. And I think, part of the motivation for this was that we're in a bear market. The DAO has 12 months of runway right now, currently, of just stablecoin runway, kind of in a worst case scenario. And we'd like to have more runway to ensure that we can survive until the bull market. Rule number one for every DAO right now is you just got to survive.
Yeah.
So I'm very much against fees, at least fees on the application layer. I actually am totally fine with fees on the protocol layer. I think oftentimes they're necessary for the sustainability of the protocol. And ultimately, the market will decide what is the optimal balance of fees on the protocol level, and the strongest protocols will win. On the application level, though, the interface, I'm very much against putting additional fees on top of protocols. I know a way to put it is that I do think the market will also determine what is the optimal amount of fees for interfaces to add on top of protocols. And I think that optimal level is going to zero. I think it's a race to the bottom.
Interesting. Wow.
I think it's super lame that MetaMask charges 0.875% on their swap feature on top of these decentralized exchange protocols. That is more than the protocols charge. And I just think it's messed up. And I think we can do better as an industry. I got into this industry to get rid of middleman, not to just become the new middleman. So I put up a counter proposal to say, instead of fees, let's try out optional donations. And that actually passed. It won, and it went live a couple weeks ago. So now on ShapeShift, if you go to do a trade, there will be an optional donation. And you just check a box to opt out of doing that donation, or you uncheck the box to opt out. That's pretty awesome. It's enabled us, right? So far, I think we've had over 75% of the trade volume itself. People have opted into giving us a donation, which is awesome. It's much higher than I would have expected. This is giving us much more useful data than if we had just enabled fees. We wouldn't really know how much volume we could have had otherwise if we just enabled fees across the board. And that's what the proposal was to do. This actually gives us some better data of how much do users care about it. And it doesn't risk, alienating users or having users leave and never come back or not do their trade. They can still do the trade on ShapeShift without the fees. So that's live right now. The vision, there's what I always say is that there's infinite ways to monetize. Fees come to mind, but it's just one example. But ultimately, you need to have users. And right now, even if ShapeShift were to enable fees and we didn't lose any users or any volume, it wouldn't be enough to make the DAO profitable. ultimately we need to get more users in order to get to sustainability, regardless of what our business model is. Like, unless we're going to charge every user like $50 a month and not lose any users, like it's not going to work right now. And I don't think that's we just need we need more users. And I think we're going to be better positioned to acquire those users if we don't add fees and if we come up with other creative ways to monetize. So one of the main ways that the DAO monetizes currently is via affiliate revenues. So a growing number of protocols and services offer affiliate revenues to interfaces that drive volume in a way that doesn't cost the user any extra. So like 1inch is a great example of this. If you go trade on 1inch, they don't charge additional fees, but one way they monetize their aggregator is by keeping the surplus on your trade. So if 1inch shows you a rate, and during the course of your trade, by the time it's confirmed, that rate actually improves in your favor, you don't get the surplus. 1inch keeps that. But for interfaces that drive that volume, they share a percentage of it.
I see.
Yearn has the same model. Like Yearn has 2% management fee and 20% performance fee. You pay that no matter what. It's on the protocol level. But for interfaces that drive revenues to them, they share it. So what I always say, I love the affiliate revenue model because it's just win-win, which is like the perfect, it's the best way to do business. And, these protocols, we don't really care how they make their pie. We just want a slice of the pie that we help make. So it can really apply to any business that generates revenues, whether it's from fees or whether they're selling t-shirts. It really doesn't matter. Many of those interfaces, they have marketing expenses, and if they can just pay a partner where they're only paying for actual revenues that they generate and they don't have to pay unless they're generating revenue, that's great marketing for them compared to like pay-per-click where you just hope that you're converting in ROI. And yeah, it's a win-win and it doesn't cost the user any extra. Where it really gets interesting is something we're working on right now, which is actually the DAO rewarding users who deposit into Yearn or trade on 1inch, do any action or donate, do any action that basically generates revenue for the DAO, rewarding those users proportionally with Fox tokens. I'm really excited about this because this can make ShapeShift objectively the best way to use a growing number of protocols and services. Not only do I think we can subjectively be the best with the best UI UX and the best values being open source and everything, but it will actually cost you more to just use Yearn or 1inch directly from your own node than to use it through ShapeShift because of the opportunity cost of the Fox that you'd be giving up. So this is in progress right now, and I think that this is the ticket for ShapeShift to acquire all these users that we need to acquire. And I think it builds strong network effects, which is so valuable and so crucial in this Web3 world as an open source project. All of our code can be forked pretty easily, but our network effects, our community cannot be. And so what I'm interested in is like, how can we build the strongest network effects? And I think that this model of being completely not only free, which is very hard to undercut, but actually free plus incentives plus token rewards and being the best, that is the best way that we can build strong network effects where every user who hears that they can do this stuff on ShapeShift, like that will bring more users in. As we get more users, we have more negotiating power, more leverage to go to any protocol or service and say, hey, if you want ShapeShift users, you have to give us a cut of the revenue that you're generating from these users, which brings in more partners, which then can help bring in more users because we're the best way to use more stuff. And I think it's just a really strong network effect that regardless of us being completely open source, would be very hard to replicate. It creates a very strong competitive barrier. Whereas otherwise, if we just had fees and we did get strong product market fit, again, someone could just fork us. They could actually do this affiliate rev model, make their fees zero, launch a brand new governance token, and like vampire attack the DAO. And I think that's the direction. Like I think I'm confident that's what would happen if we were to go the fee model and still get product market fit. It would just be too compelling for an entrepreneur to do that. And a single entrepreneur could do that with ChatGPT in a day. And so that's a big part of why I think the fees are just a race to the bottom. So let's not charge 0.865%, like just undercut MetaMask or 0.855%. Like let's front run the race, make our fees zero, monetize creatively, and build unstoppable network effects.
That's really cool. If this succeeds, I think it would probably defy a lot of business school commercial model studies. Like we have to be free and then also give an incentive to our users is a very difficult thing to undercut, as you said. I'm super curious. Maybe in a year or two or whenever this next mainstreaming event kicks in, I'd love to like talk to you again about how close to that vision you're sticking, because it sounds incredible. It actually sounds, it makes me want to actually use the platform more as an end user if that's the opportunity cost, because I kind of would be crazy not to, right? So that's an interesting one.
I love that you said that. And I always say that exact same thing, is that you would have to be crazy not to use ShapeShift if you know about it. And that's a winning model. If you can have a model where users would have to be crazy to not use you, like you're in a good place. So I would love to catch up in a year and see how it's going.
No, and I'm really curious to anyone listening on this, whether that is the choice they make, because obviously you said you can go directly or you could go to ShapeShift and it will be the same price, but you get a reward. It's kind of nice, but I'm really excited to see where that goes. A final question, because I know you're busy and might need to move off, but from a kind of very human perspective, I like to think about things that shift power to people and have a net benefit. And I know that you're also involved in Giveth, or you founded Giveth. I don't know the background on that one. Could you tell us a little bit about that and your involvement and what that is trying to do?
I'd love to. I can't take credit for founding Giveth. It started even before I got into the Web3 space. Griff Green, Jordy Bailey, and I founded it back in 2016. It was like one of the first dApps. And Giveth, basically, it's like blockchain for social good DAO. Right now, Giveth is focused on building just the ultimate donation platform. So removing middlemen, enabling individuals to donate directly to, right now there's about 2,000 verified projects all around the world that you can donate directly to with no added fees.
Wow.
So Giveth, when I had been dreaming about, even before I knew about crypto, back when I was an entrepreneur doing my first startup, we wanted to give some of our profits to charity. And then we're like, okay, which nonprofit do we support? And basically like learned that like, wow, the nonprofit industry is kind of messed up. And really, I'm like, the way I think about it is that there's $400 billion gets donated to nonprofits every year, just in the United States alone. Griff likes to say 10 trillion if you consider all of the taxes and stuff that go towards public goods. So $10 trillion goes towards public goods. But how many problems actually get solved? First of all, I don't even know the answer to that question, and that's a problem. But certainly not enough. And that scares me, because what if these nonprofits don't actually have what it takes? What if the governments, the nonprofits don't have what it takes to solve these problems? Or what if there's a fundamental flaw in the economics where as an individual or as a nonprofit or a government, you're not really incentivized to solve these problems? And as an entrepreneur, I know how hard it is to solve problems. It's incredibly hard. Mm-hmm. Even if you raise a ton of money and you're super incentivized to do it, 90% of startups still fail at actually solving the problem they set out to solve. So if you don't have that incentive, I believe people act out of their self-interest, and it's crazy to ever think that people would act outside of their self-interest. What happens if a nonprofit actually solves the problem that they set out to solve? Not only do they not get rewarded, they go out of business, right? People working there lose their job. It's really not in their best interest to do it. It is in their best interest to save one frog at a time. And that's what we see happen time and time again. So yeah, I was thinking, I envisioned a not-for-profit social network back in 2013, 2014 to basically save the world. And it was how can we crowdsource solutions to problems and then crowdfund these solutions? Enable people to just donate to the problems they want solved, let people post ideas and upvote ideas and comment on ideas and reward them for good ideas, and actually hopefully build a platform to help solve all these different problems. So I had that dream and vision, got very excited about it, but was still focused on my first startup. And then right after my first startup, I actually was looking at building what I called it Cause, C-O-Z, Cause, and was actually planning to build that. We were working on both Bitfract and I was working on Cause, and Bitfract kind of started taking off. And so once again, kind of put Cause on the back burner, focused on Bitfract, and then joined ShapeShift. So really I've just been nonstop grinding, and had been trying to share the idea for Cause. I remember I DM'd Jack on Twitter when he announced Blue Sky. I'm like, hey, here's this idea. Multiple times I was just trying to give people the idea. I'm like, someone needs to build this, right? I met Giveth 2018 in DevCon in Prague, and when I heard about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, what you guys are building, this is my dream. This is amazing. You guys are crushing it. Here's some of the ideas I had. Feel free to take them or leave them. And it was great. We were really excited. We're like, oh, you guys are awesome. And then fast forward to 2020, Giveth had kind of somewhat, fizzled out. It was in maintenance mode. It hadn't been successful at really achieving the vision and achieving sustainability yet. So ETH Denver 2020, I'm like, you know what? Let's build this for a hackathon project. Let's build an MVP. And built Cause, the DAO to save the world, and ended up getting first place. And Griff, who I hadn't actually met yet, the founder of Giveth, was one of our judges. And he was like, oh my gosh, what you guys built this weekend, we've been trying to build for years. Will you quit ShapeShift and come work with me to build Giveth, basically? And I was like, no, I can't quit ShapeShift. I'm super committed to what we're doing over there. But I would like to keep working on this. And we just got this prize money from Meet Thimmer that we can use to build it. So that was February 2020. As we know, the pandemic happened right after that. So I had a lot of free time. And we basically resurrected Giveth. And we started just doing weekly meetings. We brought back in some of the original team who wanted to continue working on it. New members joined. And again, like I saw firsthand the power of when you have like a really clear mission that other people around the world have similar mission and vision, you can build amazing software without any centralized organization, just a Discord. And that's what we did. So we basically built the new version of Giveth. We launched the Give token and the Give economy. Giveth is now a community-owned DAO and just absolutely crushing it. I highly recommend, if you're interested in donating some crypto, Giveth is the place to do it. There's a bunch of great projects. It's totally free. There's no added fees. And you earn some Give tokens when you donate to a verified project. So yeah, Giveth is awesome. It's a perfect example of like one of these many amazing protocols and projects getting built. But ultimately what we need, one of the big missing pieces for Giveth to be successful, is this interface that can onboard the masses, basically. And so right now, very focused on solving that problem. If we achieve that mission at ShapeShift, then I would love to help Giveth achieve their vision and mission next.
That sounds incredible, and what a great place to end to end an interview on. Thank you so much for your time on this. Honestly, this has been an incredible conversation. How can people find more about you, follow you on socials and ShapeShift and Giveth? Like, where's the best place to find you?
Twitter's great. I am Willy with a Y, OGO on Twitter, or willywonka.eth. And yeah, that's I'm usually the most responsive there. I do not like Telegram, but also feel free just to jump into the ShapeShift Discord, discord.gg/ShapeShift. I'm always in there, and we've just got an awesome community that would love to meet you.
Cool. I will put all those links in the show notes. And yeah, once again, thank you. Amazing and very interesting. I learned a lot in this, and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, J-Tips. Yeah, catch you in the metaverse.
So you're back again with me to wrap up with some reflections. And I can't explain how much my mind was buzzing after this interview. I've watched Willy speak before online on YouTube, and I've listened to his other interviews he's given. I'll link them in the show notes for all of you if you're interested. But I was honestly left with a feeling that this is the future. This model for organising people around the world and taking part in a human community-owned internet. It sounds pretty insane right now, but I think give it 5 to 10 years and this might be mainstream. Interviews like this may seem run-of-the-mill. Or at least maybe it will become a genuine alternative people consider alongside more traditional forms of employment and centralised companies and organisations. I initially wanted to speak with Willy because of ShapeShift and my interest in it, and I wanted to understand the DAO and really get a feel for what it's really like to go from a centralised traditional company into this transparent, open, community-governed organisation running on a Discord server and leveraging essentially the open internet to power it. But I really wasn't prepared to get the pitch for the future, which was so bold and optimistic, and in some ways kind of radically positive. I think it's easy in crypto Twitter and in this space to be jaded by the kind of greed and obsession around price and wealth and all of the weird things. And if your opinions are shaped by the mainstream news, you will probably come away feeling like crypto is this casino full of fraudsters. But hopefully this interview grounds it in some reality that some people are trying to change the world and trying to build a completely new form of governance, organizational structure, community, and ultimately public good, all on a new technology and with very pragmatic, humble principles around it being community owned, community led, free, open source. It's quite fascinating. So I took a lot away from this. I will share all of the links to find out more from Willy, from ShapeShift, and all the other interviews he's done. But hopefully you found this interesting. If you've got more ideas for interviews or topics, please do join the Discord, follow this channel on Twitter or email me. All links are in the link tree, which will be in the show notes of this. And if you enjoyed this interview and this episode, please leave a review on whatever podcast app you're using. Huge thank you again to Willy Ogorzaly for taking the time to record this interview. You can follow him on Twitter or join the ShapeShift Discord to see what he's helping to build. As usual, the theme song for this is from Jonathan Mann, and all backing soundtracks are from Epidemic Sounds. And this artwork is a bit of a composite using Midjourney and Runway AI to bring everything to life. Anyway, I'll catch you next time.